Good morning. We will now convene the Board Governance Committee. Let me request a roll call.
Okay, Ms. Ortega? Let's see. Mr. Zeiger?
Here.
And is that a quorum? Mr. Boykin? Okay. Chairperson Yee, you have a quorum.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, members. Our first item is approval of the committee agenda and work plan. May I have a motion? Motion by Ms. Marina, second by Ms. Hendricks, without objection. That will be the order. Thank you. And let's see. Next is the consent agenda, which is approval of the minutes from the November 5th, 2014 Board Governance Committee meeting. Open session. Okay, moved by Ms. Ortega. Second by Mr. Boykin. Without objection, and the chair will be abstaining from this vote. Okay. Very well, thank you. Such will be the order. We have several informational items before us today. Item number 3, the education policy revisions, second reading. Let me ask Ms. Lukens and Ms. McDuffie to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chairperson Yee and members of the committee and board. Jill Lukens, your Ethics and Compliance Counsel. This issue was first brought up in the November 2014 meeting, and at that time we provided sort of some background on some legislation that was going to affect CalPERS board and their education policy. And so we took a look at it at that time, and we provided a first initial draft of the education policy for CalSTRS and with some proposed revisions. We received a lot of feedback on the policy, and there were 2 major categories that were brought up of issues that the committee thought that we should amend the revised policy. And one of them had to do with clarifying the definition of board member and designee and making sure that that was consistent throughout the policy. The other one was also for clarity and consistency, the definition of the actual biannual educational requirement paragraph. There were 2 separate paragraphs, one for new board members and one for continuing board members. And so what we did is took the recommendations of the committee and combined that with still maintaining the language, a lot of the language from the existing education policy, but then streamlining that education requirement. So with that, if any of the committee members have any questions, we'd be happy to discuss this.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments, members? Okay. Hearing none. And this, yes, oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Boykin, please.
Thank you. Just a quick question on Board Governance 14, the top mentions compliance reporting. I guess I'm wondering, is there anything we've thought through in terms of helping the board? I mean, that's on each member and each designee to keep track of the hours that they have, and
Yes,
Yeah, I'm
as written, yes.
yeah, yeah. I just wonder if there's a systematic way for staff to help us do that, or I guess we just need to be mindful and keep a.
Maybe ask
record.
Mr. Bardo to comment on that.
So, yeah, I think the recognition is that as board member trustees and as fiduciaries that each board member will fulfill their responsibilities. And staff is here to assist and certainly provide those opportunities that are identified by board members. But it wasn't, because this is a policy you're adopting voluntarily, that this was the best way to approach it. But if, after we've used the policy for a while, if you want to adopt more of a structure for it, but we thought that this was a good place to start.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boykin. I think with respect to the policy, it is before us, and this committee is maybe prepared to approve it. I think Mr. Boykin's question is well taken in terms of its actual implementation, whether board members would be getting some staff assistance with respect to tracking our progress. Yes,
Sure.
Ms. McDuffie.
Madam Chair, if I could add a comment and perhaps a suggestion to incorporate a query to the board at the time before the offsite when we're naturally focused on things like evaluating the board's performance, the evaluation of your CEO, CIO, we could potentially incorporate that question or a framework for you to account for your hours, if you will, as part of that process. It could be a natural fit.
Great, thank you for the suggestion. All right, thank you very much. Is there, let's see, any other comment or, yes, Ms. Dillon? Let me click. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually had the same take that Grant has. It's like, we all do something else on a full-time or more basis, so it's like, any help that could be provided to us to give us reminders would be great. And I think, Amy, you're absolutely right. We talk about our attendance at meetings and things like that, that if we could have some sort of, I think we can figure out some sort of vehicle to help us out and give us reminders or whatever, at least on an annual basis. I'd like to go back to when we talk about the orientation. It's been my experience for my tenure on the board that quite frequently we spend an awful lot of time educating members about the investments that we do, and quite frequently the investment committee and our investments are the sexy part of being a board member, but what we do day in and day out is provide benefits to our members. So I would actually like us to consider taking a look at information about the system, and including just more detail on actually what the benefits are. I think we've been told that if we end up getting sued, it's going to be over a benefits issue probably, not necessarily an investments issue. So I think it would behoove all our board members to know more about what it is that we do day in and day out along the benefits line. And then also, I know it was very difficult during the time period that we were looking at the long-term, the unfunded liability and the time period that covered and how many new board members we had come in. And we actually created a separate page on our website that allowed for information about the unfunded liability and all the historic things that we've done. So maybe at that orientation also, we could include a packet or at least some information if we have a long-term project going on and the stances and the work that the board's already completed, so that we don't necessarily go back and rehash some of the things. And I'm looking at, we have a long-term IT project on. We have the potential to have a couple new board members on, soon. So having that information also compiled instead of having that surface in a board meeting, I think would be really helpful.
Okay. Ms.
And I think
McDuffie?
that covers all the questions that I had.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
For
I just
suggestions.
wanted to acknowledge your comments, Ms. Dillon, because you bring up very important points, and certainly, the benefit structure and how benefits are delivered here at CalSTRS and the performance measures that you as a board set in terms of customer service, those are all important aspects, fundamentally important aspects of the system and how it operates, and the funding legislation as well. I think you'd be pleased to know that in the last new trustee orientation that we just conducted, there was a great deal of information and emphasis focused on just those aspects. And a separate investment discussion will be held as sort of a follow-up to that initial day-long session. So we'll certainly take that point into consideration and do another review to add or enhance to what is already being provided.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Kiley?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll just offer my support, if necessary, working with staff to create a template for reporting purposes at our offsite for accounting of our time. I've created a little bit of a template over the years around the really obvious attendance at board meetings, preparation for board meetings, traditional conference travel, separating that out from maybe a block of time when we attend a UCLA or Rotman school, daily readings and of relevant material, email communications, work with consultants, work with staff, stakeholder meetings, et cetera. There are probably 8 or so categories that can be created. And I found it very helpful in terms of just balancing time and expectations in terms of how to do that, especially for those of us that are elected to the board and who are also working in a school. So I'd be happy to work with the staff on the template that I've used in the past. And if you have one from other funds, that would be helpful, because it's very interesting as how the time adds up, and it's like much in life. You get out of it as much as you want to put into it. So we have a lot of flexibility that way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
So, can I
Yes, Mr.
clarify something, Ms. He? So, the items raised by Ms. Dillon would really be amendments to Board Governance, page 12, which would be the list of the topics for orientation. So are you, your input, would you like us to come back on a separate issue and adjust that, put additional items in there on page 12? Because the language on Board Governance 13, the proposed change, just says board, new member orientation. It doesn't really, it has additional clauses after that, but doesn't really cover the content of orientation. It is the unedited version that you're looking at of the board member orientation that does have that listing. So what I think I'm hearing is that you'd like staff to come back with some additional listings of curriculum for that orientation, which would basically be an edit to that page. Is that?
Yeah.
Ms. Sanders? No, let me get clarification. Ms. Dillon?
So Brian, I appreciate that there's a summary of the benefit structure, but I think that a summary doesn't do the benefit structure justice. So I do agree with that.
So you would,
So that somewhere that an education, we try to create something that's a little bit more in-depth, or when we have people go through in-depth, that counts as educational, yes.
okay, so I just want to make sure, so staffs would take from that, if it's the pleasure of the committee, that we would come back with a separate revised item on the orientation piece as opposed to this, or we could incorporate this issue and come back with another reading on this, addressing that particular. So that's the decision, that's the fork in the road I'm at.
I think it's fine contained in this document, just somewhere I'd like to see it beefed up.
Okay,
Along the lines of the education about the system itself.
okay. And then just to follow up, I had a conversation with Amy before, and based upon some comments from Chris Waddell, who is one of the authors of the Klapman report coming out of Stanford. You have a board self-evaluation piece that you do in your offsite, and you evaluate some of the things that you want more information on. And so I've asked Amy to consider working on a linkage between what you've identified and what staff gathers for you and presents to you as sort of your possible curriculum during the year. So she's going to work on providing that linkage. And thanks, Chris, for the excellent suggestion.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have then this item before us in second reading without any amendment, but with additional information that will be examined separate and apart from the policy before us. Right. Okay. Thank you, members, for the input. So do we need a formal motion here? Okay, very good. So do we have a motion to approve the revised education policy currently before us? Okay, moved by Mr. Boykin, second by Ms. Hendricks, without objection. That motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Our next item is organization of reports to the board. Ms. McDuffie.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is the first reading of the organization of the reports to the board policy. The purpose today would be to get the committee's feedback and input on the shape of the policy, the direction that you'd like to see it take going forward, and then also your comments with respect to the appendix and the structure of the policy today. When we first talked with you about the purpose of this policy, it was really twofold. It was to provide continuity of information flow to the board so that as years go by and you experience turnover both as a board and also perhaps an executive staff, that you would capture and record some of the institutional memory in terms of the routine reports that the board receives. The second purpose of this, of course, is to provide the board with a compliance tool, if you will, such that staff could attest to you every year that indeed these reports are provided, of course, the ones that are applicable. So that was really the purpose of the policy, and we took a very thorough approach to get the policy to the draft that you see before you today. So I thought before I open it up for your comments, I would just explain to you the multi-step process that we took, because it was indeed a process. We started by reviewing the educational code, because you certainly have requirements that certain information be provided to the board that stem from the code. We also looked at your board governance manual and looked through the policies there to see where information was required to come to the board or its committees. We did an overlay of that view with the routine reports that we would naturally anticipate that you as fiduciaries charged with oversight of the system should be receiving on a regular basis. And then, of course, we reviewed the board and committee agendas for the prior 3-year period to identify and inventory the patterned reports that we saw that were coming to you. And certainly you have reports that are not considered routine. They're specific to a particular issue. But what we tried to do in terms of this policy was focus on the ones that should be coming to you year after year, quarter after quarter, or semi-annually, for example. The last step after that was to circulate this to executive staff, because certainly they have a lot of knowledge in terms of what they've been providing you and what they believe they should be providing to you. And we asked each of the executive team members to comment on their functional areas to ensure that nothing big was missing, and to modify the descriptions of these reports or the frequency or perhaps the delivery. So they had the final review of this draft, and that leads to what you see in front of you today. So with that, I thought I would open up and get your comments and questions, Madam Chair, at the pleasure of the committee.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. McDuffie.
Thank you.
Perhaps let me first make a couple comments. Thank you. I know it was a tremendous undertaking and process to compile this report. I guess my first impression reviewing the list of reports is I hope I'm not seeing any of them. There are numerous ones of them. And so I was quite taken by the volume of them. And perhaps I'm revisiting history a little bit, but certainly under the purview of this committee, I would like to entertain going forward whether there might be a way to, and then streamline makes it sound like we're going to give up on some information, and that's not the point. I think the point is, are there perhaps some opportunities to incorporate some of the more minor reports into some of the larger significant reports, and that's something that I would like to perhaps pursue as part of the committee's work plan going forward. And then I just had a couple questions, because it seems like the frequency, my impression was that the frequency of some of the reports that I would consider important wasn't as frequent as I thought they should be. And so maybe it's seemed counterintuitive to me, and perhaps I could pose the question. And it's looking at report number 12, the actuarial experience study. And the frequency of that is every 5 years. And it seemed to me that that there's kind of a natural alignment with this particular type of study with what we do relative to asset management. And so I'm just kind of wondering if there might be a need to revisit just the frequency of the reports as well. So, not to be responded to today, but it just seemed counterintuitive to me in terms of the frequency of that. And then the other thing I'd like to also explore is just the medium by which these reports are made available. Certainly with our technological advances today, I would think that a lot could be available through the website, and hopefully that is the case, but I'd like to revisit that. So with that, I know we've got a, yes,
I
Mr.
just saw a
Henry?
typo just on one, I think, we might, Chris, on number 32, I think actually Sharon, you made that comment a long time ago. I think we dropped the use of the word geopolitical to describe that ESG report. I think we want to delete that word, it's just the ESG report for investments, right?
Okay, great,
On number 32.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, I have a couple of comments here. Let me start with Ms. Dillon.
So I took a look at the number of reports that we got. I was like, holy cow. Who would have thought that there was, I mean, it was like, wow, that's a lot. And I know that all these reports come in various iterations to various committees. And we all read the board book, so we're reading other committees even though they're not committees that we sit on. So I can understand why we would say written reports provided to the board, but it seems like to add some clarity and historical background also would be to not only have the frequency and who it's prepared by, but where it's actually reported out. So I'm thinking about some of the things that we have under, right now it's under operations, audits, and finance. Some of those go to the audits and risk management committee, some come to the full board. So if we knew where they were actually reported out, then that just adds another level of information for us to where we ought to expect to hear it or see it or find it if we were looking for back reports or something like that.
We'll do that.
And then taking a look at the experience study. We do the experience study every 5 years. The asset liability every 3. And it seems like, so they're always a little off. So we're either doing an asset liability with an actuarial experience that's 2 to 3 to 4 years old, or it's only 1 year. So I was trying to figure out the schedule that it would come on. So like when, say, we're doing our asset liability now, and our experience study, I think, is next year.
That question.
Yes.
I think,
Good, Chris.
so,
Chris Sailman, Chief
yeah.
Investment Officer.
so the next
Our
time,
intent, Ed's and my intent, is to link those up and do them on a 4-year cycle.
And do both
So
of
you
them
would do your investment, the investment committee would do the asset allocation study. And this year, we anticipate we'll finish it by September. And the retirement board will then pick that up and start with the rest of the experience study and adopt the experience study and rates officially in, I believe it's April of next year. So it's going to always be a definitely a 1.5 year kind of a cycle, but our intent is to link them up. Investments goes first, followed by the actuary.
so,
In essence, you'll be on a 4-year cycle.
okay, that brings them a lot closer together. Alrighty, that's what I was, it seemed like the 3 and 5 was just too disparate.
Yeah.
It is a mismatch and it doesn't make sense. The actuary needs the asset allocation. They can benefit by the assumptions the consultants use, but they use their own assumptions. But it's helpful for them to have that new, fresh asset allocation that they can then roll into their experience study.
Super, alrighty, and then, I think when we take a look at the rules and regulations that we're doing. So that was a report, so we've received reports on credible compensation rules and regulations, and we had received reports on penalties and interest. But once we're done with those, that would not be a regular report to us, correct? And that would fall off the list then, or is that what we're kind of anticipating?
Actually, so that was information that came to light after we had delivered the draft. And so there are a couple of cleanup items that we will do for the second reading. And this is one of them that I think it would be fine to have generally rules and regulations, because those are things that you address on a routine basis, but not specific to creditable compensation. So that's how the version 2 of this will come back to you.
And then on the all active report, which has to do with charitable campaign contributions or charitable contributions. It says the report is provided to board members to determine whether they may participate in decision-making involving any parties named in the report. That would go to individual members of the board, correct? It's not the whole board gets that information, it's just that if an individual board member cannot participate in that discussion, it goes to that individual board member.
That I would ask your Ethics and Compliance Council to clarify.
I believe that's typically reported actually through the investments branch. They report all of the Form 600H compliance issues, if any, and that's a monthly report.
But that's not a report that comes to the board, I don't think.
No.
Do you update that on the board website monthly, Jill, or I know who to be asking here, but
It's on the board website. I think it's in the investment section.
Yeah.
Or it's not in the
no,
investment
no,
section.
no.
Deborah Smith runs it. She can tell you.
can't be there. It'd have to be on the conflict section.
I will point out that that's one of the things that you're going to notice from this comprehensive list is there are reports that are posted and provided that are now listed before you. So this is actually a very good start to then have staff put some rigor around this. And if you'll see in the policy, it's the CEO's responsibility to ensure compliance. So I would expect to see, timelines, work plan, but and how you would get these reports. I would expect that all to come forward. So that I just thought that was a really good point. That there are things that go on your website that they're not being flagged for you. You're not aware of.
Hey, Deborah.
Deborah Smith, Chief Operating Investment Officer. This all-active report is posted to the board's private website on a monthly basis, and I will go over that further in my COIO report on Friday.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's true of the no contact report as well, right?
That one.
Monthly?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
And that's updated, okay, great, thank you. Okay. Ms. Dillon, anything else?
I'm done.
Thank you very much, great points. Mr. Rosensteel.
Thank you. So a couple points. First of all, something that we have been discussing here, but I also wanted to make the point, which is that it would be very useful for this master list that's available to board members if it would tell us where we could find these reports. So not just that it was reported out to the ARM committee, but when, which agenda item. So if we want to go back, because I keep all of on my iPad now, you can keep everything. So I keep all of the board materials for, the last several years. And sometimes I'm trying to find a report. And I just go through, one meeting after another, looking for that report. So it would be wonderful if this thing was a master list of where we could find the reports that had been presented previously. And if they're not in a board agenda, if they're instead on our website, that we would know that. So we would, it would make life so much simpler. Thank you. The other comment is, and I'm not sure that this is to be dealt with in this policy, but the question of which reports need to be part of an agenda, and which reports can just be reported, but they don't have to be at a meeting. They can be posted publicly. We can know about them. But, you know, we're struggling, as, for example, this week
meeting.
with a lot that we're trying to deal with, some really important issues over the next three days. So I'm not sure whether it's appropriate to put that into the policy. A lot of these things do come to us as consent items, but some of these things come to us as very long presentations that often have very few, if any, questions. And I think it's something, you know, in terms of the efficiency of the board and the board getting the necessary time to focus on the important things that require our input and our decision-making, to think about what needs to be on an agenda and what can just be, you know, notified as this report is now available. Because we all read everything, we know that, we're all very diligent about this, so.
We do our homework.
Thank you, Mr. Rosensteel. Okay, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to Mr. Rosensteel's point, speaking for myself, I would really welcome our staff and our consultants' input as to which reports really need to come to us in this setting. So we look to your guidance for, these are the ones that really need to be highlighted in this setting. These are the ones that can be posted on the board secure website. This is how we will notify you that these reports are now posted on your website, and you're advised to make yourself aware of that information. There are 4 reports that are posted, 28 through 32. All fall under corporate governance issues. Proxy voting, corporate governance engagement plan, diversity of managers, green initiative, ESG report. If I recall correctly, those issues for a period of time were delivered to the board, received by the board, and then staff received input and direction from the board in a corporate governance subcommittee of the board. And from my perspective, those issues received a different level of attention and awareness when there was a corporate governance subcommittee. And those reports represent about $4 billion in assets that fall under Ms. Sheehan's shop. So it's not a small matter. It's $4 billion in assets. It's larger than some pension funds. And from my perspective, those 4 reports, perhaps if consolidated or worked together more closely, perhaps we want to consider whether or not those reports begin to get a little bit more attention, and or whether or not we want to think about resurrecting that corporate governance subcommittee for 15-16, where these reports would come forward and there would be more opportunity for the board to give direction to staff around these matters, as opposed to us receiving the reports. The dynamic of our board has changed from the period of time which we had a corporate governance subcommittee. The board has changed. I think our appetite for these issues are different. At the same time, our presence, made evident by our recent travels, is international, is global on these matters. We have a lot of credibility and a lot of respect around this, and Ms. Sheehan gets a lot of credit for that. I don't think the ship is going back to the port. I think it is sailing, and there might be an opportunity for us to think, Madam Chair, about 15-16, whether or not these reports fall directly under a corporate governance subcommittee for those of us that want to exert a little bit more leadership on these matters.
Great.
Thank
yeah,
you.
Point well taken. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kiley. Ms. Hendricks.
Yeah, I wanted to just reiterate Ms. Yee's comments and Mr. Rosensteel's comments around efficiency. I do, you know, I think in reading this item, I had the same reaction Dana did of, you know, it's a lot, and I think it's always the question of what, you know, the question for us, I think, you know, in the last 2 weeks is, you know, what do we need to attend to? What's our focus? Where do we need to be thinking as a board in terms of decision-making. And I do think we just need to do some more work in terms of how we organize some of these reports. I think a lot of the board governance, where was it? I think could kind of be consolidated. I'll leave it to you guys to do that. But I think, you know, the continual challenge for us is what should we be paying attention to in these reports, and what's sort of the value that we extract in terms of our role as trustees and fiduciaries on this board, because I think, you know, we can only attend to so much information. So I think the points that were raised, obviously you've heard those points. And then I just think with technology, and I think Chris has demonstrated this really well with his investment communication, just having links to the reports. And I think that's a really great way for some board members who do really want to get all the background to easily access that information, because I have the same issue Paul does of, I like to look back on what we've decided and how did we get here. So I think hyperlinks is a good example of how we can do that with technology now. It should be pretty straightforward to help us do that. But the other thing I want to follow up on, I saw Ed Durman. Did he leave again? Oh, okay. I keep moving because he came in the room when we were talking about this, and Chris was mentioning the experience study and the asset liability study, and sort of getting those in sync. And I know Paul and I, in talking to Chris, you know, we've talked a little bit about how to align those things better, so that, to your point, Missy, just, you know, that we're doing those in sync and not out of sync. So I guess I wanted to clarify for the board that, Chris, is your understanding, and Ed Durman, wherever you are back there, you know, is the understanding now that moving forward, can you just sit down and stay in one place? Just for we're talking about just teasing. I like that you're so active.
I know.
It means you're working hard. But we're talking about the alignment of the experience study and the asset liability study.
Right.
And, you know, looking at the reports, experience study has been 5 years. The asset liability has been 3 years. Are we now moving forward to having that every 4 years in sync, both studies?
The experience study has been every 4 years, and that's what we're moving in
Oh, it
sync
has
towards.
been every
Yeah, it's
4
every
years.
4 years.
Okay, so is that an error on here that it says 5 years?
I thought we had fixed that. Yeah,
Okay.
it is 4 years.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
It'll be in alignment, and this cycle is in that alignment
This
now.
is this cycle and our conversations with you, Chris,
Yes.
Paul, when we kind of sat down and kind of
Right.
reorganized everything. Moving forward now, we're going to be on a 4-year cycle
Correct.
with the experience study and asset
That's great.
liability. So I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that was
Good.
clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the clarification.
Madam Chair,
Mr.
if I could
Yes.
add one comment just to respond to Ms. Hendricks and Mr. Keeley and Mr. Rosenstiel. I can appreciate the sentiment of, now that you have a built-out inventory, if you will, in front of you, how do you make that work as effectively as possible to the board as the consumers of this information? And there's a wealth of it coming, certainly, and I appreciate the comment, you know, to include hyperlinks and identify agenda items or where specifically that's coming. So the usefulness of this policy will be, you know, our main focus as we go forward into the version 2. Certainly, as it relates to identifying which items are critically important for you to see as a board, we'd be happy to help you through that. I'd also be very interested in getting the perspectives of you as board members, because I tend to find that each person has their own internal barometer for how much data that, you know, you might want on a chosen issue. And my sense is that if I polled each of you, I could identify some trends and overlap and patterns. And so having that input, that data input, might be really useful as we go forward the second time around. And if the board would be open to that kind of query, I'd be very interested in running that.
I mean, I just want to add that, based upon the same comments, I think one of the things that we're going to do when we bring this back is provide an additional column for you that tells you what's legally required, what's required from your policy, what's required from previous instruction.
Yes.
But so I think that that's really important, that you understand which reports you absolutely have to get. We will consult with your outside fiduciary counsel, make sure that we have the right mix for that. So we will bring you back something with a little bit more detail. I I understand there's some other information. My guess is it will no longer be in portrait, it'll be in landscape, but you'll get that information.
It seems to me, I mean, I'll speak for myself, I'm happy to participate in a little survey like that, but I think having the more informed information added to this would be helpful, as we've talked about today. Okay. Mr. Untermuth.
Thank you. So I appreciate all this work. It confirmed my impression that what we are getting is an absolutely overwhelming amount of material. That, and of course, an overwhelming number of presentations, reports leads to an overwhelming number of presentations. And so I think it's incumbent on, I'd say, the staff and our advisors to take the next step and say, okay, here's how we would call this so that you are getting reports. All the reports that are required to be made are made. They're vetted in advance of our meetings by our fiduciary advisor and our fiduciary council, and we're getting a comment that they're in order or they're not. And here are some things to look at, much like Chris sends us the 3 big investment committee things. And then call it further to say, these are things we don't have to really talk about at meetings, except when the reports raise significant issues. I think that's the drift of Paul's comment about consent agenda, because every time we get, for better or for worse, every report leads to a presentation, and a presentation is 20 minutes at a board meeting or a committee meeting, and then if it's at a committee meeting, we have to have 10 minutes at the board meeting to hear what the committee said, and on and on. But then all of a sudden there's 3 important things to do at the board meeting, and we only have 10 minutes for it. So I think it's incumbent on our advisors to help recast this material so that we can be put more in our appropriate role as reacting to policy in the broader sense, not in the editing sense and not in the very detailed sense of results. So.
Thank you, Mr. Untermuth. Great feedback. Okay. Mr. Kiley? Additional?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just reinforce 100% what Ms. Snyderman just said. I think they call it in the industry NIFO, nose in, fingers out. So how do you, the staff and our consultants, guide our board to say, you're at the right altitude, you're getting way too low, stay away from there, you don't need to be down in there. So I think it's really incumbent upon the staff and our consultants to help guide us so that we are placing the appropriate amount of attention in the right places. Because inevitably, if our time is consumed, there's only so much time that we have. And as Tom was saying, if we're spending too much time on issues that are less important, so to say, we're then not spending the appropriate amount of time on those issues that are most pressing. So we can't do that alone. We need your guidance. And I would hope that you give us direct guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley. Ms. Hendricks?
And I would just add to your, request about input from us. I agree with Tom. I think it's on our staff and our consultants to help. This is not a new conversation. You've been hearing it since I think I've been around. I guess the one caveat I would mention would be, I think at the offsite, it might be a helpful place. I think we've talked about this before, like even doing evaluations of our board meetings, but maybe once a year on our offsite, perhaps it would be helpful for the board, and I think probably for the chair and vice chair of the board, to hear, reflecting on the last year, are there significant places where we need to modify the agendas or things like that? So I think there might be a place in the offsite or somewhere else where board members, we might be able to, I know we get feedback in every meeting, but it might be helpful to have, a space for board members to give feedback on the agendas and how we just want to continue to get more efficient and effective. We don't want to miss anything. We want to take our time on important issues, but we want to be efficient and effective in our meetings, so.
I can certainly appreciate that. This discussion has reminded me of a comment that I heard from a trustee for another statewide system last year who said, and aptly so, you have to consider board time as a plan asset. And that gives the appropriate weight to what we're talking about here today, and that's certainly how I think of it when we look at the number of reports that you receive and the ability to reflect everything that you view and make sure that you're spending the amount of time that you need on the critically important issues. So, point noted, and thank you for your comments and feedback and your insights about this, and I'll look forward to communicating with you all about the materials, and perhaps the offsite is a good conversation where we could pick this back up.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McDuffie. Thank you, members, for the robust comments and input. So that's first reading. You will be back to us with the revised.
Can I make
policy.
one more comment?
Yes, Mr. Unterman.
So if you're in school, you're expected to do 2 hours of homework for every hour in class or college. And I would say that the staff does a good job of giving the board 2 hours of reading for every hour of meeting time.
That's pretty
But-
close.
More, yeah.
Yeah, actually, it's a lot.
But somehow that doesn't seem like the right ratio for this function.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, members. Okay. We'll move on to the next item, review of information requests. Mr. Barta?
I think other than the request, the changes for the second reading, we don't have any additional information requests.
All right. Great, thank you. Okay. Our next item is the draft agenda for the next committee meeting. Comments, thoughts, revisions?
Yes.
Yes.
So Brian, the review for the proposed work plan, that's just a review and then the approval happens in July? Is that the timeline?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Unterman.
So I'm looking at the item about what we were just talking about, the proposed review on reports. And I'm not sure that if it's just, we're going to see the same compilation of all of the reports we get, that we're really advancing the ball or using committee or anybody's time very well. I'd like to ask that instead, at the next meeting, the thrust of this report be changed to one about making the board the information flow to the board more efficient and board meetings more efficient. And if it means delaying a meeting, I think that would be fine. But I'd like to suggest that to the committee.
So this would be in lieu of the, just the second reading of the proposed organization of reports?
Sure.
Okay. So really the focus being on how information flows to the board and to increase the efficiency.
Yeah, I
of the
mean,
boards.
we all seem to be of one mind that another step in the work was required. And so we might as well do that other work.
Yeah, I mean, I think given the input that we've provided you today, you're going to be recasting the document that you've presented to us with a lot more information, and probably also recharacterizing and hopefully helping us put some appropriate weight to what's important for the board to really focus attention on.
Yes. You know, and I see this as two parts. One, it's valuable to have an inventory for the purpose of, again, recording that institutional memory, right? But there's also the part two of it, which is the forward-looking part of it, that it seems to me that it would be beneficial for the committee to have a deeper conversation around our advice, staff's advice, what reports should be received in what venue, either open session or consent agenda. And that, to me, seems to be more of a richer conversation that maybe we should have at the offsite, or I would suggest that you might want to consider having it at the offsite. Only because you're doing your board self-evaluation, you're getting a broader set of information around what the prior year's packet has looked like, and that's traditionally the place that that's occurred. I don't know what the preference of the committee would be to bifurcate the two and continue with the inventory, and then use that inventory once it's finalized as the basis for which to call or have a more focused, forward-looking view.
Do you mind if I?
No, please, Mr. Unterman, please.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the logic of that. I just think what you're starting is a years-long process. And as a client, as you will, from advisors, I would like our advisors to come prepared to just make a recommendation. This is what I think would be better. And we can react to that, that's fine. But if we start a process where you're getting all of our points of view and then you're going to try and synthesize it and all that, and it may or may not be better, or it may or may not be longer, I'd just like to see a recommendation and that we can all react to.
Yeah, no,
that's fair enough.
Thank you, Mr. Unterman. I think there's a consensus of view that I've heard this morning with respect to, really trying to, and it just happens to be around the whole issue of organization of reports, but just in terms of, what is it that the board needs to know, needs to focus more attention on as compared to other matters, and that we really are keeping kind of our role as a board pure with respect to not, overreaching with respect to, just kind of the mechanics of these reports but that the information we do get and how is that flow going to happen and where, so that we can track where the reports are. And I think to Mr. Unterman's point on the efficiency, I view that conversation as starting with this and continuing, kind of throughout, because we're going to find as we probably do the self-evaluation that there'll be other opportunities to talk about how we increase efficiency. So I think the direction, if I may, to the advisors and to the staff is take all of what we have put out this morning and obviously recast this particular report, but then come with a recommendation with respect to what's appropriate for this board to really put its focus on.
Certainly. I think we can do that for June. I think we can make a recommendation and contrast what is current state versus what we think might be better given the circumstances.
Okay.
Good.
Good. Thank you. Ms. Dillon, you had a comment, yes?
Yeah, I actually am going to disagree. So I don't necessarily agree with the concept. I just disagree with having it here. I agree with Amy that it's a topic for the whole board and not just for board governance to have that conversation. Seems a lot of these go to the whole board, and while we have most of us here today, that's not necessarily a guarantee in June because not everybody sits on the committee.
Right.
So I think it's actually more appropriate for the board to have that conversation. And I can understand the angst of not wanting to wait till the offsite, but it is something that we do review during the offsite. So that's not a sword I want to, fall on if we wait or don't wait. But I do think it's not appropriate for the board governance to have that conversation. I think it needs to be elevated to the level of the board, and that's a decision that the board makes. It is, the list is actually up for first reading, and I don't want to wait and move that down the road until we have the conversation about what's more appropriate and when it comes and how beefy it is. We need to institutionalize the list, and that is appropriate for the Board Governance Committee, and I think that can be done. We can do the second reading and approve it at the next meeting. There's no reason for us to hold off on that.
Yeah, and I guess, Ms. Dillon, I don't see those as being mutually exclusive. I think the conversation around, I guess, how the board can best operate and with the greatest degree of efficiency certainly can start from this particular item. And I think what I'm expecting back at the next meeting is really what we've all just shared with our advisors. And so I don't think we're not taking anything away with respect to the issue of the reports and how we're going to, in essence, kind of prioritize that and which ones require more robustness and the like. So I don't, and if I'm mistaken, Ms. McDuffie, correct me, but I think that was certainly the direction back.
Well, I can see both points of view. One way that I think both ideas could be married together is that the governance committee could take up the recommendation in June and start to have, give feedback on what the recommendation is. And the next step after that could be recommending that the board discuss in its offsite, and have a broader conversation with all board members present.
For me, that just goes to what Tom was talking about. We'll have a conversation, board governance becomes a recommendation to the board, then the board rehashes that whole conversation. That's what for process, I think it would be, I think the board could have that conversation in June. I don't necessarily want to put that off, but I think it is more appropriate because we do have a board member missing. And if more of us are missing when board governance has that conversation, then it's bound to come up in the board again. So I'm just thinking for efficiencies and not having to have that same conversation twice, it would be better to put that conversation in the board. It's the pleasure of the committee. I'm just.
Yeah, Mr. Huntsman, let me have you speak and I have a thought.
Sure. Well, two thoughts. Maybe what we're talking about is having two separate agenda items next meeting. One is the continued work on this compilation, and the other, the more broad discussion about efficiency and effectiveness of communication, et cetera. That's fine with me. The other point that I'd like to respond to Dana about is that I think it's directly in the charter of the governance committee to talk about how the board governs itself and to make recommendations to the full board. So if you can't, now in my experience in other settings, when you have a full deliberation on something like this in a committee, particularly a committee as big as this one, and then you present it to the board, there may be some questions about the details of it, but usually it's not a let's start from scratch discussion, and hopefully that would be the way it would flow to the full board. But I do think this is an important topic to take up if we're going to be a more effective board.
Thank you, Mr. Huntsman. Mr. Zeiger?
So this is an enormously complex issue for a variety of reasons. One is the sheer volume of materials that we have to absorb and the complexity of it. I mean, it can really cross your eyes sometimes. Despite how good everybody on the board is, it is enormously complex. So in terms of how you can work your way through that, a process for, I personally like layers of things, right? That you can see what the major issues are on the front and then go deeper as you want to go through. But the other problem you're going to have is that everybody has their own way of absorbing and doing this, and that you somehow have to be responsive to everybody's requests, all the board members. And those are may or may not be the same task. It's not quite clear to me. So we're all eventually going to be in on this conversation. If we can somehow narrow the scope in some way to help you do that work, because it is so layered and so complicated. I don't know that you can not have as much material as we have, right? At some point, it has to be there somehow. The question is, how do you find it when you need it? How is it brought to your attention when you need to find it? These are all really, really tricky questions, and for which you're gonna have better answers than I do.
Well, and I think, I'm sure Amy knows this better than anyone here. If we look across the country, the board books of all these public pension plans are dramatically different.
Yes.
So there is no perfect way to do this. Ours isn't necessarily the longest, but boards have developed cultural approaches to this stuff, and there isn't necessarily precise legal demands on each of these reports. So, Colorado, when we met, our investment committee was about an hour and a half. The years I was on the board. But it varies all across the country, how approaches to this. So we've got to make this work for you. And I think it goes without saying, I mean, it's not that we have to write a lot, or there's a need for us to do that. If you don't find it useful or required, I think the staff would love to prioritize that time doing something else. So don't feel it's pushing pushing you to have all these reports. That's definitely not the case. We want to. I think anything like this, it's an iterative process where something looks interesting, you add it, the basket gets bigger, it gets bigger, it gets bigger, and we don't stop, pause, refresh. And that's why we liked this exercise. We had the same reaction, was, oh my gosh. I mean, that was our reaction. And so to the extent we have an exercise to pause and refresh, we'd welcome that. Right, guys?
Well, I want to just speak to Mr. Unterman's suggestion, because that was what I had in mind, and I appreciate, Ms. Dillon, your sentiments that really the entire board should be engaged in a discussion of how we can improve upon our efficiency and effectiveness. And this particular item, I think we've provided a lot of input back to our advisors, and I think the advisors are poised to come back with just a recasting of how these reports are going to be, or the compendium of them are going to be presented to us with more information. And perhaps that can be agendized in this committee, as well as in preparation, it would be on second reading at that point, right? And then preparation for board consideration, and then have the larger agenda item of Mr. Unterman's also on the board agenda item. And I think we'll probably see some incorporation of discussion of this into the larger board effectiveness issue. So that would be how I'd like to proceed, but I'm open to other thoughts. Mr. Rosenstiel.
Never mind. I'm good with what you proposed. I think we
Me
should
too, yeah.
move forward and figure out a way. I mean, I think the sentiment is pretty consistent here. The process maybe is something that we've got some questions about, but what we know is we want to create efficiency and we want it done quickly. So whatever is the best way to get there, we're all for it.
We're not postponing efficiency.
I agree with your recommendation, Chair.
Excuse me, and one more comment. I just want to, and I might be wrong, but my sense is the only way we're going to get there is by being led by our consultants and the staff.
Yeah.
We're not going to spend the next 3 months noodling this problem. So it's very important that leadership come from, or thought leadership come from our consultant.
Yeah, and really the larger focus on just our proceedings as a board and how we can be the most effective and efficient is kind of our focus. And so if we can have that come back to us so that we don't have to spend our time kind of
Understood.
reaching in, that would be great. Okay. Great, thank you. Other comments, members, thoughts? Okay, and do we have?
Ed Folia from CTA, NEA retired. I wasn't sure where I should have my input, but on the written reports provided to the board under governance, item number 5.
Yes.
Board member attendance. So having a board member attending a meeting is very important. But it seemed to me, according to the charter that establishes your board, you're supposed to have 2 more members that have not been here. And we are now entering the 4th year, 40th month. Now, as a board, do you report to someone after you receive a report saying these 2 seats are vacant? These reports are filed somewhere. Is for instance, we're very fortunate that we have Controller Yee and State Treasurer Chang. They are here. And almost it's very unusual to see someone not here. You guys take all your work very, very, very seriously. But you also are being robbed of some expertise. Because I don't care how you look at what you're doing and how much experience you have, you don't know what it is like to be a retiree. And we have no voice up here. So it seems to me that under attendance, that should be a part of the report, and then to whomever the attendance should be getting a report. Because in one conversation I had with the governor, he had no idea that this was a vacancy. Now, I grant you that was about 2 years ago. But anyway, I am really frustrated because we have allowed this to become routine. So we don't have 2 board members. Well, that's okay. This is wrong. We've just passed an unfunded liability law that actually impacts school districts. One of the vacancies is a member from a school board that has to live with that particular law. So it's not just retirees. It's the whole concept. And I don't think this board should just allow it to slide. I think this board needs to make a record of it and say, this has not been done. Until it's not done, it's not a complete board. So I know you heard me before, and you're saying, oh, okay, Ed, you're doing it again. But, you know, I have found over the years, if you don't keep on doing it, then people forget and nothing's happened. And I hope we don't go 7 years without having a member of the board or a member of a school district on our board. So I don't know if this is the proper place to put this in, but I think somewhere along the line, this board has to let people know exactly what's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we certainly recognize your concern with respect to having a full board in operation. We'll take your comments under consideration. Thank you. Okay. Let's see, our next, let's see. So we're on the draft agenda for the next meeting. Any other comments with respect to the draft agenda? Okay. Hearing none. That conclude the meeting? Yes, I think any other members of the public wish to speak at this point? Okay, hearing none. That concludes the board governance meeting. Thank you, members, very much for your input. Oh, I'm sorry, Dana. Yes. Ms. Dillon, please.
Benefits and services will start at 12:45.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.